The C-130 transport plane cut through the thick, moonless night sky over the Hindu Kush Mountains. Inside the vibrating, cold metal fuselage, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jenkins moved among the litters, checking the vitals of the wounded Marines strapped in. Her hands were steady, her voice a low, calming murmur in the darkness. To the 22 seasoned operators of SEAL Team 3, crowded into the cargo hold, she was just another asset being dropped into the chaos, a necessary piece of medical equipment. They called her Doc in the way that military men always did, a generic title of respect for the healers, but their eyes told a different story. She was a woman, she was a nurse, and in their minds, she had no business being on a direct action mission in the Shock Valley. She belonged back at the battalion aid station, not here. I strapped into a harness and jumping into the hornet's nest. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jenkins was not supposed to be on this flight. Her billet was clear. Senior flight nurse with the 455th Expeditionary Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron at Bagram Airfield. Her job was to receive the shattered bodies of soldiers after the battle, to stabilize them at 20,000 feet, and to deliver them to the surgeons in Germany. But Sarah had spent 15 years in the Navy, and she had learned that the clean lines of a billet sheet rarely survived first contact with the enemy. It had started 3 days prior when she was pulled into a classified briefing. A high-value Taliban leader was holed up in a complex of mud brick buildings carved into a steep mountain face in Nuristan. The intel was solid, but the extraction was a nightmare. The village was a fortress, accessible only by foot and defended by an estimated 200 fighters. The SEALs would go in hard, but the real problem was the exit. The landing zones were zero. The mountains were too steep, the valley too narrow for a safe helicopter extraction under fire. The plan, therefore, was to call in the helicopters only after the objective was cleared and a hasty landing zone could be secured. But if things went south, and they always went south, casualties would have to be stabilized on the mountain until the birds could get in. The senior medical planner had looked at Sarah when he explained the last part. We need someone who can jump, who can climb, and who can run a trauma bay on a mountainside with no power and no support. The team's corpsman is good, but if we have multiple casualties, he'll be overwhelmed. We need a second set of hands that can also defend itself. Sarah had raised her hand without hesitation. She was a flight nurse, yes, but she was also a volunteer, jump-qualified combat veteran. She had spent her off-duty hours at Bagram learning to fire an M4 as well as any infantryman, not because she wanted to be a soldier, but because she refused to be a liability. She had seen the scorn in the eyes of combat troops before, the quiet dismissal of the pogue from the rear. She had trained to erase that look. Now she was being asked to prove it. When she walked into the SEAL's hangar for the mission brief, the look was back, but this time it was mixed with confusion. The team leader, a grizzled senior chief named Mike Ox Olson, had stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Ma'am," he said, but I'm not here to take his place. But I'm not here to take his place. I'm here to give him an extra set of hands and a wider field of care. If you go down, he can keep you alive. If 2 of you go down, he has to choose. I'm here so he doesn't have to." Ox had grunted, unconvinced. The rest of the team, big men with beards and arms covered in tattoos, had looked at her like she was a piece of malfunctioning gear they were forced to carry. She was only a nurse. She was a woman in her late 30s. She belonged in a clean hospital, not in their brotherhood of violence. The jump into the blackness was chaotic. The helicopters couldn't land, so they hovered low, and the SEALs fast-roped down. Sarah went third, the nylon rope burning through her gloves as she slid into the freezing night air. The moment her boots hit the rocky slope, she heard the unmistakable crack of an AK-47. The element of surprise was gone. They had been spotted. The next 4 hours were a blur of violence. The SEALs fought their way up the mountain, room by room, wall by wall. Sarah stayed low, moving with Ramirez. They weren't just nurses. They were ammunition bearers, reloading magazines for the operators as they fired. They pulled security on corners. They were combat medics in the purest sense, their medical bags open and ready, their rifles slung but accessible. The turning point came just after dawn. The SEALs had taken the main building and were moving to clear a secondary structure when the enemy counterattacked with a fury. Rocket-propelled grenades slammed into the rocks, sending shards of hot metal flying. Over the radio, Sarah heard the chilling call, "Man down! Man down!" It was Ox. A burst of machine gun fire had torn through his leg, shattering his femur and severing his femoral artery. He was bleeding out in the dirt. Ramirez was pinned down 50 meters away, unable to move without exposing himself to a hail of bullets. Sarah didn't think. She moved. She sprinted through the crossfire, the air around her humming with the sound of rounds passing close enough to touch. She slid into the ditch next to Ox, the dirt kicking up around her from impacting bullets. His face was pale, his eyes wide with the knowledge that he was dying. His blood soaked the rocky ground beneath him. "Ramirez is pinned!" she screamed into her radio. "I'm on the senior chief! And I need suppressing fire now!" Without waiting for a response, she went to work. This wasn't a clean operating room. This was a ditch full of blood and dust. She ripped open his pant leg, found the source of the bleeding, and plunged her fingers into the wound, compressing the artery deep inside his thigh. With her other hand, she tore open a tourniquet pack. It took every ounce of her strength to get it high on his thigh and ratchet it down. But she did it. The bleeding slowed, but it wasn't enough. She needed to get fluids into him, but she couldn't do that with one hand. She needed to be free. "Senior Chief," she said, leaning close to his ear, her voice a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to push. Push down on this wound as hard as you can." Ox, barely conscious, looked at her. He was a warrior, a killer of men, and here was a nurse, a woman he had dismissed hours ago, asking him to save his own life. He nodded weakly, his big hand replacing hers on the wound. As soon as his pressure was in place, Sarah ripped open her aid bag, started an IV, and hung a bag of Hextend, squeezing it with her hand to force the fluid into his collapsing veins. For 30 minutes they lay in that ditch. Sarah worked on him, stabilizing his fractures, treating for shock, all while the battle raged around them. She called in medical updates to the command post, coordinating the incoming medevac while bullets whizzed past her head. She was calm. She was precise. She was the only thing standing between Ox and death. When the Apache gunships finally cleared the immediate threat and the helicopter was able to slip into the valley, she helped drag Ox's heavy, unconscious body to the bird. As they lifted off, she continued working, never stopping, never wavering. She had saved his life. She had saved the mission, because the mission's success depended on leaving no one behind. Back at Bagram, in the recovery room, Ox woke up hours later. The surgeon came by and told him the simple truth. If that nurse hadn't done what she did, in the first 5 minutes you'd be dead. She held your artery closed with her bare hands while getting shot at. Weeks later, recovered enough to walk with crutches, Senior Chief Olson stood at attention in Sarah's office at the airfield. He wasn't wearing his kit or his game face. He looked humbled. In his hand, he held his own trident, the golden eagle clutching a pistol and trident, the symbol of a Navy SEAL. "SEAL Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We wrote you off. We didn't see you. We saw a uniform and a gender. We didn't see the warrior." He held out the trident. "This isn't official, but on behalf of my team, we wanted you to have this. You bled with us. You fought with us. You are one of us." Sarah looked at the symbol of brotherhood in his hand, a token never given to outsiders. She didn't take it. Instead, She reached out and gently pushed his hand back toward his chest. "Senior Chief, I didn't do it for a medal or a badge. I did it because it was my job." She paused, a small, genuine smile crossing her face. "But I appreciate the thought. Now get out of my ICU and let me work. And Senior Chief, next time try not to bleed on my uniform." The SEALs didn't write her off again. A fight's back. She had proven that courage fights back. She had proven that courage has no gender, that a nurse is never just a nurse. In the heat of battle on a bloody mountainside, she had picked up a rifle with one hand and saved a life with the other, and in doing so, she had earned a place in the brotherhood that could never be taken away. She had changed the way they saw war, and more importantly, how they saw the people who fight it.